Hi everyone, welcome to another BAPT in Conversation webinar. Today it's great to welcome Susan Storm here. She's a writer, blogger, MBTI practitioner, really familiar with this kind of the younger generation, the online community of type fans and followers. So really interesting to have a chat with her about what she's learned along the way. So welcome, Susan.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here I'm seeing some people I really admire in the comments, people whose books I've read. So this is a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. And I just want to start off, a bit about like as it is now, what do you sort of describe yourself and your job as currently?
I describe myself as a blogger. I got MBTI certified about, I think, 6 years ago. I don't know. It's all fuzzy right now. And I write about type, usually 3 new articles a week. Not as much video, mostly blog articles. And I just try to share as much good information as I can. Some articles are listicles, some are more in-depth articles. But that was what I would call my main job. I also do coaching sessions with people, but writing takes up the majority of my time.
Did you say the word listicle? Was that the word?
Listicles, so things like 24 things you'll relate to if you're an INTJ. That would be a listicle, like the numbered lists of different things.
Okay, that's a new. See, I didn't even know that. That's news to me. I'm definitely learning. So you're saying about this work that you do. I mean, in terms of it being a job, like does it pay? Like, how do you actually manage to eke a living from doing what you do?
Yeah, most of my income comes from ad revenue. So I have ads on my site, and for every 1,000 people who read an article on my site, I make a certain amount of money depending on the time of year. So the most of it comes from ad revenue, but then also I've written several ebooks, and I do, like I said, some coaching as well. So those 3 things combined make up my living.
Amazing. So, and how many years have you been kind of working at this for?
I started Psychology Junkie in 2015, so this is the 6th year.
Okay. And how have you seen it grow, and what sort of, I don't know, statistics and things have you achieved in terms of your viewership and things?
It's been really interesting. Every year, I usually am able to double the traffic as well as the amount of income I can make on it, which makes me sound super greedy, but it's like just how it's working. It's becoming more and more popular. The MBTI is, and like you and I were talking about prior to this, I think a lot of that comes down to like the viral phenomenon of 16 personalities, which has that, as we said, has its pros and cons. But it's becoming more and more popular, and then I'm trying to temper a lot of the kind of viral popular content that isn't necessarily accurate, but it's more showy with some more accurate content. So I'm always reading books by like Angelina Bennett's here. I've read her book, which I love. Catherine's here, and I've read her book, and I'm trying to constantly refine what I can learn and put good content out there, and refer people to good authors as well. But yeah, it's definitely a growing and expanding niche that's very, very popular, especially with millennials and Gen Zers that are trying to figure out who they are, where they fit in the world.
There's a real kind of hunger for this sort of information, learning about oneself. And it's, I guess there's a out of that demand has risen a whole range of people to feed that. You're sort of alluding to, there's various different levels of quality, let's call it, or nowadays that anyone can sort of publish themselves on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
What does that kind of create at the end of it all when you've got all of that just coming out, all that information?
It does get a little chaotic for sure. I think you have a lot of questionnaires, like the most popular questionnaire, 16 personalities, which is not very accurate. You got a lot of people who are getting mistyped on there. And then you have a lot of people who, the younger generation has grown up with YouTube, watching user generated content through YouTube, watching, reading blogs from individuals like them. And so, and also, Gen Z, they're also really interested in being entrepreneurial. Millennials are interested in being entrepreneurial and having independence. So they see these different avenues as ways that they can make a living for themselves, which is great. The only problem is some people are really trying to, be careful about it, trying to gather as much information as they can. I have a friend, Megan Lavoda, who's getting trained with Linda Behrens. She's really trying to make sure that she's doing the ethical thing, and she's like doing all her research. And then there's other people who are just like, all right, I got INFJ on 16 personalities. I'm going to create a blog and write like all these articles about what it's like to be me. And then you have infiltrating the good content. You also have a lot of inaccurate content. And so it ends up creating very murky ideas about what type even is, and creating confusion for people who genuinely want to understand it.
So if you were to recommend to people, what's the best sort of sources that you could go to get a kind of deeper and truer understanding of what type's about?
I would prefer people to read the books, because there's a lot of great books and a lot of great authors who've written books who aren't creating websites. But then I think that when it just comes to websites, I really enjoy Personality Hacker. I think they're doing a good job of making the content as accurate as they can. And Heidi Priebe, I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's not doing as much blogging now, but she used to, and she does a really good job. She's very concerned with making sure she's done her research, and she's a psychology major as well, so she's got that background. And then as far as YouTubers are concerned, I do like Megan Lavoda. She's doing a great job. Linda Behrens, like her website, she posts blog articles. Her website's really good and really informative as well. But when people come to me and they want to learn about type, I really enjoy directing them to the really good books by the people who, like I said, aren't creating as much online content. Getting back to the basics, like Mary Louise von Franz or Gifts Differing, even just some of those like basic books. Or if they really want to go in depth, I really like Mark Hunziker's book on depth typology is really good.
Mm-hmm. There's a range of like resources, and I mean there's even obviously the Myers-Briggs company themselves, kind of owners of the MBTI brand and so on. They put out some content and things, but is there as much engagement with that compared to the other stuff that you're talking about, or some of the blogs and things?
Yeah, it's funny. Most people who've been reading about type online haven't actually gone to the official Myers-Briggs website. They're coming across more I don't want to name names about blogs, but more popular blogs that maybe don't have like there's a couple blogs that are really popular that they let users submit all this content and they just publish it, but nobody running the blog is a background in psychology or is MBTI certified. So they publish a lot of type related content, but there's no checks and balances as far as like, okay, is this 100% accurate or not? It's more about writing style being catchy. So, and there's a couple sites that are very much like that, and they know how to market well. So they're getting up there in the search results, but the content, as far as accuracy is concerned, is not what it should be.
I mean, it strikes me, there's this kind of loss of control of the name and the brand MBTI, so they have what I call #MBTI, this kind of, it becomes a generic term for anything to do with like type models, especially anything with 16 types. So, what do you think the impact of that is? Like, this sort of, like I said, this muddying of the waters, like what does that mean for people who want to actually do it professionally and so
on? I think that most of the people I know who are wanting to do it professionally, they've figured out that the 16 personalities isn't what it should be. And I think there's enough good content creators who are starting to say, hey, don't go there. And, you know, like myself, Heidi Priebe, quite a few people who are making really good content that are talking about things like cognitive functions, which is something that 16 Personalities doesn't touch on at all. And we're really trying to spread the word about what's accurate and what's not. But there still is a huge group of people that aren't going that deep. And maybe they're making entertaining content, but it's not accurate. So overall, I think the effect is that there is less credibility. People see it as less credible because they're associating it with things like tests like what Disney princess are you, or which, all those BuzzFeed tests that were really popular back in the day that you could create in 5 minutes. And as opposed to the MBTI, which was created with, over years with lots of researchers, and they can't be compared, but people see them as the same.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess then you've got professional psychologists and academics who see now what is out there on like accessibly online.
Mm-hmm.
Idea that this is the MBTI somehow, it's become confused, and obviously they're kind of predominantly working with like trait models like the Big Five,
mm-hmm.
which is actually what the aforementioned 16 personalities is actually based on. When you look at their website, it's kind of a trait model assessment that kind of has a normative distribution and then splits it and kinds of type. So what do you think? We were talking about how some people get a sense of having the wrong type from doing that assessment. What evidence do you see of that out there? Like, what kind of people do you talk to that have done it
and have gotten the wrong result?
Yeah.
Oh, almost every day. I even did a test. This was, several years ago. I had 10 people who were had been officially MBTI, taken the MBTI with a practitioner. I'd done a lot of research on it, and they were 10 different personality types, and they all took the 16 personalities quiz. And I think 7 of them came out INFJ, and then like 2 came out ENFP, and 1 came out INTJ. But it was a very strong intuitive bias in the test, as well as like clearly a leaning towards intuition and feeling as well, and introversion. And so yeah, I don't have much faith. And usually when I'm coaching people, they're like, oh, I got this type on 16 personalities. And a lot of the time as we go through the coaching process, they're like, actually, I don't think I relate to this type anymore. I think, they through the finding their best fit type, they realize it's something else. And again, if you look at the 16 personalities website and you start digging into their data, they had, for example, they showed like the most intuitive countries in the Americas, like South America and North America. And these intuitive countries were like hugely intuitive, like 30 points above average or something like that. And then it was most sensing countries, and the sensing countries were still intuitive. Like they were still, scoring, the majority of people were still scoring intuitive, which doesn't match up with any of the research done by the actual Myers-Briggs Foundation, where I believe, and I'm not good with recalling facts, but I believe it was like, I don't know, intuition to sensing is like sensors are more like 65% of the personality, and intuitives are more like 45 or 35. So yeah, there is a lot. I wouldn't ever trust a 16 personalities results at all, really, at this point.
It's interesting, getting to the bottom of it, that they're kind of looking at a different thing, sort of taking an average split of sort of expressed behavior, like, are you doing a bit more of that or a bit less of that?
Mm-hmm.
When you were actually working with people to try and get to an underlying idea of type preference, what sort of things are you asking people, and what sort of things are you looking for, helping them to explore?
Yeah, I'm looking more for the kind of information they're prioritizing, and the more the motivations behind their behavior. Like I spoke to someone who said, well, everyone types me as INTJ because I'm interested in going into all this technology career fields. And people are thinking, well, she seems serious and she's going into technology and she's smart. So therefore, she must be INTJ. And an issue you're having with people start selling their services as coaches online before they've gotten any formal training in MBTI. And so they're very much judging based on behaviors and based on appearances rather than looking at why is this person going into technology? Why is this person, what information is this person prioritizing when they make decisions? Are they prioritizing how are people going to feel and what kind of personal impact am I having on this? Or is it, the thinking versus feeling motivations? They're not looking at that. They're more looking at the outside. And so you have people who got really into type because they took an inaccurate test and then they sell their coaching services. And I've seen some coaching services where they're asking people like 3 questions and then they're like, all right, you pay me $50, answer these 3 questions and write them and send them in, and then I'll let you know what your type is. And I think that is just creating problems. I've spoken to literally 3 people in the last week who got typed that way, where they paid someone, sent in a few questions, got their type sent back to them. And it was very much about like behaviors and not the underlying processes at work behind those behaviors.
Yeah, it's a good way to describe it. As we know, type is about dynamics within the mind itself, and I think it's always important to recognize that. And when it becomes flattened into behaviors, then we can lose it because there's more than just type that influences our behavior, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
It's picking that apart that is important. I've got an interesting question, one that I usually ask anyway. It's about what kind of personally for you, what benefits and use have you got from learning about psychological type of yourself and the people that you know?
Oh, it's definitely benefited me in so many ways. I've said this story a lot, but I'll say it again. I had a really not a great relationship with my dad growing up. He's an ENTJ, and I always thought he's so like harsh and commanding, and we just like really drove each other crazy a lot of times, even though we would really connect over introverted intuition. We could have these amazing conversations about like philosophy and the meaning of life and where's the world going and be in 20 years. But like when it came down to like a lot of judgments and decisions about things, we were very different. And he was the one who actually introduced me to MBTI because he was having a practitioner. He spoke to a practitioner and got his type figured out. And so understanding type helped me to understand my dad. And therefore, ever since then, I was able to look and see our differences and not get frustrated by them. Instead, be like, oh, he's the person I should talk to when I want to get the extroverted thinking perspective on things, because that's a blind spot for me. So I'm going to go talk to him. And I do that with other people. I'm married to an ESTP and I'm an INFJ. So if I need extroverted sensation information, I'll go to my husband. And but also it helps me to understand the people around me better, not get annoyed by, not to see that differences are weaknesses or negatives, but actually to see them for the strengths that they are. And also be aware of my own blind spots as well. So I think it's improved every important relationship in my life to know about type.
Mm-hmm. Is that what kind of got you started into heading this direction as a career? Was it this personal value that you saw in it?
Yeah, when I started this, I didn't even think of it as a career at the time. I had started making these little books for everyone in my family and my extended family. I was going to all my relatives and giving them all these interviews and then like compiling information like, here's how we should all talk to Aunt so-and-so, and here's the kinds of things that will probably bother that person. And like I was making all these like, it's such an FE thing to do, but like all these little handbooks about how to interact with each other in the way that each type would like best. And then I was like, well, you know what? I should just throw this on a blog because maybe other people would find this useful and they'd have better relationships too. And so I'd start making posts about like 5 things that really annoy these, INFJs or INFPs or whatever. And it was just for fun because I was doing marketing at that point, and this was just something for fun. It was not a business project at all. But then I realized it was getting more and more traffic, and I was like, all right, maybe, I'm a military wife with all these kids. Maybe I can turn this into a business and do what I love and help people. And so yeah, I don't remember. Blanked on the question you asked me now in the answering of it. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we were like how you kind of found value in typology and how that led you to kind of pursue it as something more serious and put your time and energy into it. I think one of the things you've talked about there is your family. So important relationships. I know you've got 5 children. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so I mean, just give us a quick idea. I'm a parent as well, and I know it's really interesting seeing children develop. How have you seen your kids develop, and has that kind of deepened your understanding of typology?
It's deepened my understanding of typology, and I've also had to learn to broaden my view to not just include typology and how I understand people, but also to include things like how the brain actually works and develops, because there's certain phases kids go through, and that's just because a certain part of their brain is developing. Like when the creative part of their brain is developing, they start lying all the time, and that's again goes back to why you don't want to type based on behavior, because certain behavior is going to be more related to brain development than type. Like teenagers are really fascinated with novelty and spontaneity more. But so you could easily type a bunch of teenagers as perceivers when really that's just the part, their brain's just being rewired at that point. So and with my children, one thing I think what I've noticed most quickly is the dominant perceiving process that they're using. Like one of my children is a dominant extroverted intuitive, I think. Now I always keep it with kids. I'm not like this is absolutely not going to change. I'm not going to say that, but I see extroverted intuition 24/7 with this little girl. She's constantly like changing things and experimenting and innovating and using things the way they're not supposed to be used, and with 5 kids you really see that there's these drastic differences. Whereas if I was just one, I'd be like, okay, maybe that's just what all kids are like. But now that I've had 5 and I've also have lots of nieces and nephews, I see that no, these perceiving processes really show up fairly regularly, like fairly obviously. And even the JP preference, like my judging babies always wanted to be, they were very routine oriented. They always wanted to be swaddled when I was getting them to sleep. They wanted everything like tight and structured and predictable. And my perceiving babies, they hated being swaddled. They never wanted to have a nap or bedtime at the same time. They always fought against any kind of like routine. When they colored, they wanted blank paper. They didn't want to color in the lines. And so you start seeing these things over and over again, and you realize, okay, this is actually legit. Like this stuff, this is real. And it's really fun to see the differences and see the unique strengths that each of those types brings.
Yeah, it's remarkable. Like you said, when you've got children who come from the same family, the same environment, and end up being very to people.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like my one of my child is all I know is he's a SJ. I know that much, but he's follows the rules. He colors in the lines. He's very concerned with like making sure everything is just so and just right. And if he'd been my only child, I'd never had any other children, I might look at a child who's, I don't know, an ESP and be like, wow, that if I didn't know about type, I could look at that parent and be like, well, that child is completely out of control. Like, but having 5 children, I'm like, okay, no, like I have an ESP child, I have an SJ, I have, and you see that they're all different, they're all equally incredible, and we don't have as much power over what their personalities end up being like as a lot of parents think they do.
So on that point, yeah, do you do parenting workshops or classes as well? That's something that was posted in the chat.
I do have a course I created a couple of years ago called Parenting by Personality, and it doesn't do especially well. I think I sell like one a month, but it's something that I really wanted to create for parents so that they could understand, how to just work with their children better when it came to things like homework or, you know, how to communicate more effectively. So yeah, I did create that course. And that's the only thing I've created so far specifically for parents, although I do have some posts online, some written articles.
What do you think are the biggest pitfalls that parents face when it comes to typology and different types?
I think it's thinking and not even consciously doing it, but trying to make your child a mini you. And when you know type, you're aware when you're doing it, so you kind of can't get away with it as much. But even people who do know type um, still run into that problem. Like I know this little ISTJ boy who has EFP parents, and they kept talking to me like, I don't know what's wrong with him. He just comes home from school and goes to his room and listens to the same audiobook every day. Like, I think there's something wrong and we need to, like, really concerned. This kid really struggled, and but because he wasn't an EFP, there was something wrong with him. He wasn't okay, and they had all these negative like thoughts and reactions to his way of doing things. And I think that's just something that type helps with. But some people know only enough about type to be dangerous. Like they're not, they know, they still think my type is the best type. And really, there's all these other types out there, but they should still be more like me. I see that a lot with parents and their children, especially if there's one kid who's like the odd one out.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I suppose if you become the black sheep of the family by being seeing things in a different way. I mean, have you ever seen that sort of thing cause, deeper, more longer term issues for people?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I see it every day in the comments on articles that I've written, or people I'm talking to who are trying to find their type, that they have these huge rifts with their parents that they haven't been able to like get past because their parents, if their parents were SJs, they wanted them to be like them, like SJs. If their parents were NPs, and they grew up trying to become like what was expected. So if they were an ENFP, they were trying to like really lean on their inferior function, and that creates a whole bunch of stress and problems there. And so they grow up into, it's a lot of insecurity as they grow into adulthood, and maybe not being able to grow and blossom in the functions that come naturally to them like they would normally be able to if they were in a family where they were accepted and valued for who they were.
Yeah, it's quite major stuff. And I mean, like you said, it's when this stuff's real, when you see it in these kind of situations, like people aren't blank slates, that when the environment's trying to shape people into being a certain way, and there's something internal to that person pushing back that they're not, no one's in control of. It's just this force that's there that's told them a different way. So
I also think it's something that's really important for people who are typing people to realize that what you grew up with has a huge impact on how you're going to show up in your type, which is why it's so important not to type based on behaviors, because like if you grow up I'll just use my own experience. As an INFJ, I grew up with TE valuing parents, TEFI spectrum. And so that was what was the right thing to be in my family. And so I incorporated a lot of their way of doing things into my life, just because that's how, I was homeschooled too. So, I was really close to my parents. So I think that's an important thing to note. Sometimes you'll see people who will type someone a certain way because they do one thing that looks like a different function. Like, oh, you do this one thing, you own a business, so you must be TE, because TI types would never own businesses or something like that. They get so wrapped up in the cognitive functions and people and thinking that each individual has to look exactly like their dominant or auxiliary function and not show anything from any of the other four functions. And then you end up with problems there too, which you know all about that because you talk about the shadow functions and understand that we use all the functions. It's just and our life experience will alter how those show up in our lives.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, like it's a good point that you make that, that there's a healthy level of adaptation, by which we can learn and grow and be shaped by people who are different from us. The analogy I use is like the frame of a tent. I'm talking about like the modern tents, which have got like fiberglass poles. You've got a frame,
Yeah,
but it's not so rigid. There's some play in it, and it can move, and you can press on it, and the wind can blow it around. But if it goes too far, then it could shatter.
I like that metaphor. That's really good.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I went camping a lot as a kid.
There you go. Well, yeah, and even the like cliche left hand right hand thing, like I think that applies well to even if you're a FE type, you still have FI. You're still using it just like you use your left hand, and I use that one a lot. I know it's just such a good example, but I like the tent one. I might have to steal that from you sometime.
Okay, yeah, you can. Yeah, so let's look at now, like what's the people that you kind of have as, I don't know what you call them, followers or readers or viewers of your work, and you were alluding to sort of through comments and feedback and things, having developed some sort of relationship and understanding with the people that engage with your work.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see them as wanting from typology, and what do they get from it as a benefit?
I think that there's several things. For a lot of them, it's to like validation, like, oh, it's okay to be who I am. Um, I get a lot of readers who have the parenting issue that we talked about, where they grew up feeling misunderstood, whether it was by their parents or their school or whatever it was. And type gives them a way to feel like it's okay to be themselves, and to understand themselves better. The issue is when, like we talked about so many times now, is like the mistyping is they go, oh, I'm I don't know, INTJ, and they're reading INTJ articles and they're like, yeah, this sort of helps me understand myself better, but not really. This whole Myers-Briggs thing is just baloney because I don't relate to this. But yeah, there's people who want validation. There's people who want to heal relationships that they have with others. There's people who are like, I'm a ESTJ. How can I get an INFP to fall in love with me? I get a lot of those, but I don't usually have time to respond to them because of the 5 kids thing. And also I don't really tend to do the whole, here's how to make people fall in love with you stuff. Other than in like a playful way. Um, so yeah, there's that, and then there are people who who are doing it professionally, like they want to know how do they become MBTI certified, or they work in, I've a couple of people who work in prison ministries and they go to prisons and try to coach people, or people who work in churches or different things like that. I see a lot of those I don't know, those 3 or 4 things I mentioned, but I see a lot of those different things.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great thing you mentioned, like feeling that it's okay to be yourself.
Mhm.
I mean, what kind of world are we living in where people finding that a problem?
Yeah, I think I don't know. I think you run into these generational differences where you always have the one older generation who judges the next generation, who judges the next generation, and judges the next one. It just goes on and on and on. And I think that I also think, speaking as a parent, it's really hard to make your kids feel understood all the time. Even as a parent who knows about type and who, like, I read psychology books all the time, like I think that everyone in a way feels misunderstood and will forever feel misunderstood, regardless even sometimes of how much their parents tried to do the right thing, because parents aren't mind readers. They're not, even the best parents aren't mind readers. We're not going to get it right all the time. So, but there's always some amount of healing that I think uh, each generation is trying to do that from recover from like the past generation. For example, like the baby boomers, like they had a huge divorce rate. So Gen X came along, like they're trying to heal from that. And the millennials, they got into all kinds of college debt. And so Gen Z types are less likely to go to college and they're more interested in like being self-starters. So I think that maybe I'm going off on a tangent here that's not related, but.
Well, let's look at some of those groups. It's interesting, like the Gen Z, Gen Z, what age will they be approximately?
Oof. I think that's like I think it's people who born in 1995 to, is it 2007? I'd have to look it up because I don't remember for sure. It's in there, like mid to late 90s to mid to late 2000s. So they're just starting to enter the workforce. And they're already seeing big differences in how they plan for the future from how millennials did it. As in, for example, less people wanting to go to college, less interested in getting married. And when it comes to they're much more competitive as well in the workplace from what they're seeing. They actually say that Gen Z tends to relate and connect better with boomers because boomers and Gen Zers are both competitive, very job focused, earn lots of money type, individualistic type people. Whereas millennials were more like, let's all be a team and work together and be a unit. And we're more focused on like the sign of being an adult for a millennial is having like emotional maturity, and the sign for Gen Z types, it seems to be more related to financial independence.
So do you think, when people are like using typology questionnaires, do these sort of differences in desirabilities and cultural differences in the generations, do you think that might be affecting how people's results come out?
I absolutely think that it impacts things for sure. If you look at what's valuable, the values of Gen Z, for example, it's authenticity, emotional maturity, and empathy, and very NF type. If you're just looking at what people tend to assign to NF traits, that would be, so a lot of times I think they're going to take a 16 personalities test and get NF. And then a lot of Gen Z types and millennials, I think, identify with introvert because more and more people are living their lives online. They're getting social connection through things like Twitter and Facebook rather than going out to a party. So a lot of questionnaires ask things like, would you rather go to a crowded party or stay home? And a lot of extroverts would be like, I'll stay home and watch Netflix and text my friends. And so the meaning of and the difference between things like extroversion and introversion are they're getting mixed up a lot. So a lot of people are identifying as introverts who are extroverts, and NFs who maybe are SFs or STs or any other number of things.
What do you think then will be like the solution, to a kind of a world where there is this accessible knowledge to typology, but would avoid the sort of problems that have arisen with this exponential increase in what's available?
I think it would be great if the people who are just people like the younger generations who are wanting to make it as a typology expert would start learning from the people who came before them. So learning from people like Catherine Stothart, who wrote I don't know if I'm pronouncing her last name right,
yes,
but who wrote the How to Get On with Anyone. Some of the leaders in information related to type who've been studying this for a really long time. It's just why I have huge amounts of respect for people like Megan Lavoda, who's learning from Linda Behrens, or people who are open to learning from the others who came before them. I think that's really important. And then, but also being able to put their millennial or Gen Z spin on the information to make it more viral to counteract the false viral information that's going out there.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. So what about, where's the balance, do you think, between knowledge with enough kind of rigor and depth to it versus kind of accessible and entertaining?
I think you have to have a little of each, because attention spans, like a lot of people in my generation and younger are multitasking all the time. It's like multitasking is a big thing. And so sometimes in order to get people to the meatier content, you have to hook them with something like a listicle, like 10 things that you'll really hate if you're an INTJ or something. And then, but from there being like, this is like a tiny tidbit of valuable information, but click here to get deeper. So yeah, there's a book called, I think it's called Make It Sticky. And it's like trying to like figure out how to make the message of typology sticky and practical and accessible and easy to understand. And once people get into that, then being able to like lure them into the more in-depth information.
Yeah. So it's interesting that your website's called Psychology Junkie. I'm sort of seeing this analogy to like listicles being like the gateway drug to more powerful medication.
Yeah, and for example, this was kind of accidentally came across this, but my teenage daughter, I have a 15-year-old daughter, and she's really into anime, like Japanese anime, and like we started watching it, and for fun I made an article like, here's which anime character you'd be based on your type. And I always put like a disclaimer, I can't know for sure what these people's types are because I'm not sitting down with them and giving them, the questionnaire or anything like that, but these are just my best guesses, just kind of a fun article. Well, right now my top 10 articles are almost always related to anime, and I'm like, I never meant to write about this. Like, I never meant this to be like the focal point of the site, but from that, more people who read those articles are then getting into the other stuff. So yeah, it's and you don't want to, and sometimes I'm like, oh well, a lot of people read this anime stuff, so I should just, there's part of me that's like, well, financially, if I was just looking at it from a business perspective, I should only write about pop culture, anime, and things like that. But then that's not ethical to me to only focus on that. So, kind of put dabbling in like fun stuff, like here's the INTP anime characters, and then, but still balancing that with like three articles that are meatier content for every one fun, lighthearted article.
It's interesting to balance to aim for.
I think also, like, if the Myers-Briggs company could make their questionnaire more millennial or Gen Z friendly, that would really help. Like 16 personalities isn't that, they made all those cartoon characters for the 16 types, and then they made it really socially shareable. Like, I'm a this, why don't you take it? Like when you share it online, it would be so easy for a more accurate test to be done. And that would definitely help make things less murky too.
One thing, I'm aware of, having studied psychology myself, and, seeing like more serious sort of academics and psychologists that see the other end of it, the engaging customer facing stuff that we're talking, probably have a shock, that it's so far removed from the serious world of academic papers and articles and research. And yet that's the thing with psychology, because it reaches everybody, because everybody has psychology. So
yeah.
What do you think, do you see anybody getting as kind of excited and organically like building this sort of online community around sort of the big five models and stuff that's more trait based?
No, not with big, and also with big five, you have like, I don't know, I think it's more bad or good, whereas Myers-Briggs, everyone's good. I mean, it's more positive, whereas big five, it's like, oh, I'm really neurotic. I'm not going to make a Facebook page. It's like neurotic people unite, and have like so I think I definitely don't see that. I know that Enneagram is also really popular too. Myers-Briggs, and then Enneagram is the other like personality system. Although some people say it's not personality, but that's also really rising in popularity. But I don't see the popularity as much for things like the big five. I think
there's a disconnect, especially then between the world of like academic psychology and the Gen Z kid on the phone looking for something to understand themselves.
yeah, there's a big difference. And yeah, I think making it accessible. I mean, I think I read that the average Gen Zer watches 23 hours of streaming video a week. I think it's YouTube, I think. And I could be wrong. Maybe it's all video, but I thought it was YouTube. And so video content's a really big deal. And that's something that if we can get some great YouTubers out there who really know what they're talking about, it'd be a great thing.
Well, I'm hoping BAPT might be developing some content in the future. So let's see what we can come up with. And like you said, to put some more kind of deeper and more research knowledge out there, and try and hopefully we'll engage some of this community more, in the future and stay more relevant. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, I think a lot of it also comes down to networking with the, I think if we can all network with each other and share each other's content, like, I mean, if you put out something like Richard, if you put out something on what you've been doing with shadow functions, I would be so excited to share that with my email list and my Facebook audience, things like that. And so I think some people who are really so talented and knowledgeable with type, if they can connect with these younger influencers and then get, and then we can share, like we can share each other's content or mention it, things like that. That's a great way to like, get the right content out there and grow the following for people who really know what they're talking about.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you here to join us today. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your experience with us.
Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's great. Hopefully we'll have another chat in the future. So
yeah.
Thanks to everyone for joining us this evening or this afternoon or wherever you are in time and space. And yeah, so it's good night from me, from Generation X, and I'll see you for the next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. See you later. Bye-bye.